everyone! Welcome to Social Studies with Miss Rogers, World History Edition. Last class we looked at the rise of Rome and her transition from a republic to an empire. Something you'll notice about empires throughout world history is that they never last. And to be honest, nothing ever lasts forever. So without further ado, we're going to see exactly how this mighty and fearsome empire of Rome falls. And the fall of Rome is going to transition us into a completely new era called the Middle Ages. So let's get started. When we last left off in class, Octavian changed his name to Augustus and became Rome's first emperor. During his reign, something called the Pax Romana will begin in Rome, something that historians refer to as hundreds of years of peace and prosperity. And that sounds super great and all, but it's really important to know that this time period was not as perfect as it sounds. For starters, we know that Jesus Christ was born during Augustus's rule, and there were a lot of corruption and violence issues just within that small section of the Roman Empire at the time. And the crucifixion of Jesus would have taken place under the next emperor, Tiberius. It was actually Tiberius's governor, Pontius Pilate, who ordered the crucifixion. Once Christianity is really created and established as a religion, Christians as a whole are severely persecuted in Rome. Remember, Rome adopted their mythology from Greece, and the idea of Christians turning their backs on the gods and goddesses is seen as completely unacceptable. And religion isn't the only source of issues going on during this Pax Romana, the time of peace. Most of Rome was incredibly poor. Only about 10% of the people belonged to the wealthy class or the patricians. And the emperors used distractions as a means to keep the common people from complaining, or even worse, revolting against the empire. An example of these distractions would be the gladiator battles in the Colosseum. Criminals and prisoners of war would be thrown into the Colosseum to die as a form of entertainment. It was pretty brutal, but people loved it. And it just shows that using the word prosperity to describe the Pax Romana can be a little bit misleading for those who don't actually take a closer look at what Rome is dealing with at the time. The other word we usually use to describe the Pax Romana is peaceful, and again, not perfect and can be misleading. There's still violence going on. Anyone who may have threatened the emperor is killed. Rome is constantly fighting with both Germanic tribes and groups in the Middle East. The Romans are constantly enslaving people. This is not what you would expect when you hear, oh, the Pax Romana is a time of peace and prosperity. But was it? After many emperors that history considers good emperors, we see Rome start to get weaker and weaker. There are 4 factors that gradually weaken Rome after these good emperors, and the first factor we're going to start with is the political factors, aka what we consider the interesting emperors of Rome. In ancient Rome, there were some effective emperors, but there will be multiple who receive less fortunate titles. Are we going to go through every single one and talk about the great things they did? No, that would be so boring. But we will highlight some of the most interesting emperors, and we are going to mention 4 of them today. First, we have Caligula. Caligula was the 3rd emperor of Rome and was also the first emperor to be assassinated. It's said that Caligula would brag about having affairs with the wives of his high-ranking officers, and was also known for having incestuous relations with his sisters. If these accounts are true, it's believed that Caligula believed in the Egyptian practice of preserving the bloodline. This ancient thought believed that by marrying within the royal family, the children created would strictly have royal blood. However, incest can lead to a lot of defects, including mental illness, which is probably why Caligula, and many other royals throughout history, were a bit crazy, because what sane emperor would enjoy watching people be tortured? It's also said that Caligula humiliated the Senate by claiming they were so useless and their jobs were so easy that his horse could do it, and he wanted to make his horse an official senator. But also this guy had a really unhealthy obsession with his horse. He claimed that he was a god, and he emptied the Roman treasury faster than he could refill it, either through conquests or higher taxes, and soon a plot to end his tyranny developed. Caligula was assassinated along with his wife and daughter, and it was humorously reported that Caligula found out the hard way that he was not actually a god. Next we have Emperor Nero. Nero started his rule at age 17 and originally shared a lot of his power with the Senate. His attitude changed, though, when he defied his mother's wishes and his mother plotted to put his brother on the throne. Nero had his brother, his mother, and the wife his mother picked out for him murdered. Fun fact, Nero originally tried to have his mom drowned in a paddle boat accident, but she survived. So he ordered her be stabbed to death. He clearly had some mommy issues. And this event changed his outlook on life. It's believed that Nero wanted to build an extension of his palace, but needed space. And then all of a sudden, a giant fire erupted in Rome, destroying some districts, severely damaging others. It's said that while this fire killed many and injured more, Nero sat on the roof of his palace singing and playing the fiddle, and then blamed the fire on those who practiced Christianity in the empire. Many Christians were captured and their fates were ranged from being dressed in animal skins and torn apart by dogs, to being drenched in oil and set on fire to provide light for the emperor's garden parties. You know, normal criminal punishments. The empire faced many revolts and rebellions under Nero, and when things got out of control, he took his own life. Fun fact, Nero was also the last emperor to be blood relatives of Caesar and Augustus. Third, we have Commodus. A man named Marcus Aurelius was the last of Rome's good emperors, and he was also thought of as a philosopher. But his son Commodus is not remembered as fondly. Commodus did face a truly traumatic event. His sister plotted to have him assassinated, and it shattered his heart and his trust in the world. He became extremely paranoid, immediately executing anyone he believed might be plotting against him, as his sister did. As he continued executing people, his desire to kill grew, and he started killing anyone who just caught too much attention from him within the empire. Eventually, Commodus declared that he was a reincarnation of Hercules, and started fighting as a gladiator in the Colosseum with disabled people. Commodus really made his soldiers round up disabled people around the empire to fight him to ensure he wouldn't lose. And I always have kids so upset and horrified and sometimes ask why people would let this happen. And yes, this is horrifying. But when learning about ancient times, you've got to put modern day morality to the side to understand why people did the things they did. The mentality back then was pretty much kill or be killed. Today, we make accommodations for people who might need some extra help because we value everyone in modern day society. But it was not that way thousands of years ago. I mean, even Sparta in Greece would leave weak and sick babies out to die because if they weren't going to make good soldiers one day, what good were they to the society? So when we see these actions by Commodus, and today we are horrified, these actions would have not had as severe of a reaction from the public back then. Overall, Commodus was a very ineffective ruler, and a group of assassins poisoned his meat. Unfortunately for them, Commodus did vomit it back up, but they were so determined to rid Rome of this curse of a man, Commodus was ambushed in his bathtub and strangled to death. The last interesting emperor I would like to mention was Elagabalus. He was 14 when he came to the throne. Elagabalus married 3 women, but he was known to not only prefer the company of men, but loved to wear pretty clothes and shoes. He was definitely gay and is said to have even been married to a male slave. But the thing about Elagabalus was that he tried to completely push aside the Roman gods and force Romans to worship his Syrian god, Elagabal. This was one of the biggest reasons many Romans wanted him dead. Soon there was enough support for Elagabalus' cousin to claim the throne that when Elagabalus ordered he be executed, the guards refused. He and his mother were beheaded and their heads dragged through Rome and thrown in the Tiber River. So there you have it, some examples of fine leadership within the Roman Empire. Going back to our 4 factors that weakened the Roman Empire, we already discussed the political factors, so next would be our social factors. So as I've said before, and will continue to say, everything in world history is connected. So when we have less than satisfactory rulers like we just talked about, people tend to become more discontent. There will never be a perfect society. There will always be crimes, there will always be poverty, but flaws in a society become more noticeable when there's bad leadership present. And that type of atmosphere makes people lose confidence in their government. And when you have people lose confidence in their government, less people want to participate in public affairs. Everyone all around just kind of loses interest in being a part of the community, and not many people are proud to be Roman at this point. And it only gets worse when we then add our third factor, economic issues. Rome had the misfortune of experiencing a plague, and that deeply hurt the economy. It cut down trade and small industry, which put less money in circulation. Invaders kept trying to ransack different parts of the empire and stole money, destroyed villages, which cost money to rebuild, and soldiers to defend remaining villages, guess what? Cost more money! Between the plague, the invasions, and various civil wars that broke out along the empire, Rome was close to facing an economic collapse. And we already talked about how many irresponsible leaders spent too much money, whether it be on golden toilets, palace extensions, or even fancy clothes. Remember, it's all connected. And all three of these previous factors will lead to our last factor that weakens Rome, our military factors. When you have bad leadership that makes people lose faith in their rulers, you have less people who are willing to risk their lives for the empire. However, Rome desperately needs soldiers because with an empire this large, you need a lot of hands to keep everything in order. For a while, Romans paid for mercenaries, pretty much swords for hire, and this actually created more problems because the soldiers fighting for Rome were not loyal to Rome. They were loyal to the money. And as the economic issues increased, the empire had less money to spend on mercenaries. And since the soldiers were not loyal to Rome, they would leave as the money started disappearing. And others who stayed were more loyal to their commanders than to Rome, and that was still problematic. And all of this craziness is going on when Emperor Diocletian takes the throne, and he has a thought. Maybe the empire's in such crisis all the time because it's too dang big. It's just too much for one emperor to handle. So he splits the Roman Empire in half. And in his mind, it's still one big Roman Empire and he is the main emperor. But he will rule the eastern half and he will appoint not necessarily a co-emperor, but kind of a more subordinate co-emperor to be in charge of the west. Because just to be clear, even though there is one emperor in charge of the west and him in charge of the east, he still sees himself as the overall authority of Rome. And at first, this was just a symbolic split, just to make it easier to manage the entire empire. But over time, we'll see the two halves of the empire really split physically and become two different places. And this system seemed to really work out for the eastern half of the empire. As time went on, the eastern half of the Roman Empire started progressing and growing stronger, while the western half of the empire continued to decline and grow weaker. And this trend continued when Constantine took the throne. Constantine was the first Roman emperor to truly embrace Christianity, and he himself became Christian and made it a huge part of the Roman Empire. Constantine was seen as a very strong emperor, and he even moved the capital of the empire. When we think of the Roman Empire, we naturally come to the conclusion that the city of Rome is the heart and soul of this empire, but Constantine decides that the eastern half of the empire deserves its own capital. He takes the city Byzantium and renames it Constantinople after himself, and declares that it is the new Rome. So now the western half of the empire has the capital city of Rome, and the eastern half of the empire has Constantinople. This will be so important later, I promise. Now both the eastern and western halves of the empire still all consider themselves to be Roman, because remember, this is supposed to still be one giant empire. But as time goes on and the west grows weaker and the east grows stronger, they will continue to split until they're considered two separate entities. And we end up calling what will become of the successful eastern half of the empire the Byzantine Empire. And the Byzantines are going to flourish while the Western Roman Empire drowns in chaos. A group of nomadic conquerors called the Huns, led by Attila, are traveling from Asia towards the west. As the Huns move further and further west, pillaging and looting as they go, the Germanic tribes also move further west, trying to get away from the Huns. They're afraid of the Huns and they're seeking refuge. Even though many of these Germanic tribes have been at war with the Roman Empire, they're begging the Western Romans to allow them into the empire to be saved from the Huns. And they are given that refuge. And that brings about its own set of problems. Do the Romans treat the Germanic people terribly? Yes. Do various Germanic tribes sack parts of the Roman Empire as they travel through it? Yes, both are true. Should the Germanic people have been more gracious that the Romans let them in and saved them from the Huns? Did the Romans deserve what happened to their empire because they treated the Germanic people so poorly? These are the questions that historians still talk about. But regardless as to who's at fault, this causes the Western Empire to officially fall. As all of these Germanic invaders are looting and sacking cities, you have poor leadership that wasn't executed, who literally flee the scene because there's no one there to protect them. There's no stable military because people are so unmotivated and unloyal to the empire at this point. There's no money for a good mercenary army, so people abandon the cities and flee to the countryside. It's all complete chaos. It's a giant takeover of Western Rome. Everyone's lives are uprooted and changed in an instant, and it's when the dust settles and people find a new normal that we see a new era emerge in the world, the Middle Ages. Now, the Middle Ages have many names, such as the Age of Faith, the Dark Ages, but all of these names tend to have connections to what's going on in Europe at the time. I would like to introduce the Middle Ages by taking a peek at areas such as Africa and Asia and what will be known as the Byzantine Empire. Once we have a better understanding of what's going on everywhere in the world at this time, we'll see if those names for the Middle Ages still sound like a good fit. So, I'll see y'all then.